Welcome to Chapter 9. This chapter is titled Problem Solving and Relapse Prevention. This is in our self-directed behavior book. So because this chapter is titled Problem Solving, we should start by kind of identifying what some of the common problems are that people run into with this project. And so generally problems can occur during your self-change project when you're actually doing it, so you can be kind of making progress, and then experiencing some type of plateau where you feel like you can't make any more progress. Another problem that often happens is after you've completed the project, sometimes people's unwanted behaviors come back. So people often make one plan, but then they run into these obstacles, these problems that we're talking about, that they did not predict. So what we need to do is expect that there will be problems and just be ready to deal with those problems. So in this chapter, we're going to talk about how to deal with those problems so that ultimately we can prevent relapse. So what we want to do is we want to start with our best, most well thought out, comprehensive plan for change. So hopefully we did that in step 8. And then as we are kind of working the plan, we might start to realize what isn't actually working or what's kind of a problem. And then we can start making adjustments. And so that's why this slide is titled Tinkering with Your Plan, because the idea is that the first kind of go at it should be fairly successful, but not entirely successful. That's uncommon, that it just works perfectly the first time. So it's wise to expect there to be some problems and then be able to kind of tinker with the plan to solve those problems as you go. For lecture activity number 1, what I would like for you to do is, if you have the 10th edition, it's on page 309. And if you have the 9th edition, then I would like for you to open to page 273, I believe. But it's for sure on page 309 in the 10th edition. And it's under the subheader, Tinkering with Your Plan in Chapter 9. I want you to read the story about the 55-year-old man and his running self-change project. And then after you read through that story, I'd like for you to just write down how this man tinkered with his plan. What adjustments did he make? How did he identify them? So just tell me about the adjustments that the man made to his plan for lecture activity number 1. All right, so to come up with ways to solve these problems that are appropriate, we'll need to kind of talk about problem solving. So problem solving is figuring out obstacles to your progress and then figuring out how to overcome them. And we really need to be able to define the problem clearly, think of solutions, and then predict the consequences of various alternatives. So there's 4 steps to problem solving. The first step is to list all the details of the problem as concretely as possible. The second step is to brainstorm as many solutions as you can without criticizing any of your ideas. Just kind of let them flow. Sometimes if you start getting in a zone and you're just letting the ideas flow, some dumb ones will pop up, but then out of nowhere a good one might pop up, so that you don't want to judge anything and stop that kind of creative process. So after you brainstorm all the solutions, then the third step is to choose one or more of the solutions that you've brainstormed. And then finally, the last step is to think of ways to put these solutions into operation. And then eventually check to be sure you are actually implementing them. Also, you'll want to use record keeping again, just like you had been doing in your original plan for change. And you'll want to use reinforcers to kind of reward those new behaviors that you're doing. So hopefully they'll kind of stick. Some things that we know are that people who use problem-solving skills tend to be less stressed, better at coping, have higher self-efficacy, and more confidence. But what you do want to do before you just go and change your entire plan based on some of the problems that have arisen is you want to be sure to keep the parts from your old plan that did work. So you kind of want to go through your plan and weed out what did work, keep doing that, and then make changes for what didn't work based on these steps of problem solving. And then hopefully you'll have some greater success when you're using the old techniques that worked and the new techniques. For lecture activity 2, I would like you to do the first 2 steps in problem solving. and use your own project to do these steps on. So just as a reminder, the first two steps were to list all the details of the problem as concretely as possible. So you'll have to start by thinking of something in your plan that maybe didn't work out great or could use improvement. And then do that first step, list all the details of the problem as concretely as possible. And then second, brainstorm as many solutions as you can without criticizing any of them. So you can go ahead and do those two steps for in-class activity 2. So self-change requires a lot of focus. This isn't easy to change yourself. And so the most common reason for failure is actually a lack of adequate self-observation because people lose focus. They don't keep their eye on the prize when it comes to this project. So what we want to do is we really want to focus on observing and recording the increase of your wanted behaviors, your good behavior. Some people that are trying to lose weight, for example, often fail when they stop recording what they are eating or recording how many calories they took in that day. So observation is really important to continued success in this project. And there's 3 major factors that interfere with continued self-observation. The first of which is stress. So stress takes all of our attention and then it makes it really difficult for us to focus on our self-change project. So some things to kind of ask yourself are, do you think that I'm using stress as an excuse to not do well in my project or not meet the sub goals I had set for myself or not follow the rules I had set for myself for this project? Do I get lost in stress so that I don't have to focus my attention on the things that I don't want to do? So again, it's kind of a good opportunity to be honest with yourself about how you're using stress. Are you using it as an excuse to not get the steps of your project done? Another factor that interferes with self-observation is alcohol. One of the effects of alcohol is that it takes away our self-consciousness and we act in a more relaxed way. So if we are overeaters or smokers or have bad tempers, we are more likely to engage in these behaviors after a few drinks. And the truth is that alcohol is a depressant, so we're just less likely to do things after a few drinks. If we're trying to lose weight for our project, we're probably not going to work out when we're drunk. It's difficult to remember to record behaviors if you're drunk, or even if you do remember to do it, you don't necessarily care at that point. And so then the third factor that interferes with continued self-observation is discouragement. Sometimes we stop recording because we hate what our records are telling us. So even if your project isn't working right now, don't stop keeping records. They will help you eventually. So make sure, though, that you don't have any unrealistic goals. Because if you have unrealistic goals, this can be a source of major discouragement. So you'll want to go back and kind of go over your goals for yourself for this project and make sure that they are within reason. So there is something called self-control fatigue. And the truth is that we can become tired of constantly exercising the self-control that this project kind of requests or requires of us, I should say. So to prevent what is called self-control fatigue, we want to avoid temptation. Know that people usually become fatigued late in the day and are more likely to give in then. So you want to really observe yourself and make sure that you have distracting behaviors in place and self-reminders in place for when it gets late in the day and you get more and more kind of tired and sick of keeping yourself in check. Another thing that you can do to prevent self-control fatigue is distract yourself when you start thinking, screw it, I'll just have 1 cupcake, or I'm just not going to go for that run today, or whatever it is that you're doing that you shouldn't be doing. Have those distractors ready to go so that you can kind of stop that process of getting out of doing your good behavior. And then increase your positive mood is kind of the last way to prevent self-control fatigue. So when we feel negative, we are less likely to practice self-control. So if you can increase your overall happiness and your overall positivity, then you're less likely to give up or give in to your bad behaviors. For lecture activity 3, I would like for you to list 3 ways that you can start increasing your positivity today. So what are 3 ways that you can start increasing your overall positivity and trying to have a more positive attitude in life? So some of the common problems that people have involve the things here on the slide. The first of which is that you don't believe these techniques that you're learning about in this textbook will help you, so you just don't use them. And if that is your case, what you would want to do is ask yourself, why do I feel this way? And be honest in your response. Reread chapter 1 where the success rate for self-modification is discussed. And ask yourself why you think you'd be an exception to this success. Why do you think you would be the one that would fail? And then the second common problem is you don't believe you can attain the goal that you want. So your belief that you can change affects how hard you try. And so if this is the case for you, if this is the problem you're running into, you want to work on self-efficacy, positivity. Look for examples of people that have overcome challenges in their life. And you want to make sure that you're not only recording your failures, but you're also paying attention to your successes. And that when you do have a success, when you do your good behavior and you're on a hot streak, that you make a big deal out of those successes to yourself. So you're using positive self-talk, you're congratulating yourself, you're giving yourself little rewards and treats. And the other thing that you want to remember is that you deserve success at this project, that you are worthy of the success. So you have to let yourself experience that success as well. And the third common problem is that you don't really want to change. So be sure to compare short-term gains versus long-term goals. Yes, you can eat that cupcake now and it's going to taste delicious. But if you keep doing that, or just feeding into your short-term desires, then you're never going to get the long-term payoff of fitting in those jeans that you want to wear or having the body that you want to have. So you also want to kind of make sure that this thing that you want to change is really something that needs to be changed. I have students that sometimes choose procrastination when it's not actually a problem in their life. They're still getting their assignments done and they're getting A's on them and they're in honor classes, everything's fine. But they have just been told their whole lives that procrastination is bad, so they choose that for this project, when in reality it's not a problem for them. So if you've chosen something that you don't really want to change and it's not really a problem, then don't try to change it. Don't do it for this project. Pick something else that you would want to change to do the techniques you've learned in this course on. And the next reason that people have some problems is that other people might be discouraging their use of the techniques they're learning in this class. So maybe people are telling you they're silly or they won't work or you don't need to change or peer pressure. Some people might even say they don't like the new you. So if you are around these people, you might want to kind of question if these are people that you should be around, if they're positive and healthy for your life. Or maybe these are people that are family members and they're going to be there. So you need to address with them that their behavior is not helpful to you and that this project is important to you, or whenever you use these techniques later on in your life, just be open and honest with people about the importance of changing, and that might kind of take down their guard a little bit towards it. And then the last common problem is that maybe you started off with some success, but then you became discouraged. So at first, it's like always exciting to do this project because it's new. But remember, plateaus are normal. Don't give up. You might get bored. You might lose focus, but try to not give up. Instead, readjust your plan. Create new sub-goals to help you reach your long-term goal. Sometimes new sub-goals can kind of create new challenges that can keep the project interesting for you. So for lecture activity 4, I want you to tell me if you have any of these common problems. If yes, which problems do you have, and what can you do to fix them? If you don't have any of these common problems, how can you prevent the one of these 5? How can you prevent the one that you think would be the most likely to happen to you for lecture activity 4? Okay, so now we're going to talk about relapse prevention. And so to talk about this, I'm going to start by reading you a passage from the book about a guy named Jeb. So Jeb took up smoking when he was 15. When he turned 25, he decided it was time to quit. He gave himself a date. On August 1st, I will quit smoking. As the date drew near, he worried about his ability to just quit, but he wanted to try. He woke up that fateful morning, fixed his coffee, reached for a cigarette, said no, and threw all his cigarettes, matches, and ashtrays into the garbage. During the next 10 days, he did not smoke at all. Other things were changing for Jeb during this time. He and his girlfriend were having increasing difficulties. She wanted to break up, but Jeb didn't. Finally, she told Jeb she wouldn't see him anymore. This depressed him considerably, as he had thought she was the one. His depression lingered, made worse by the fact that his grades on his most recent tests were unexpectedly low. That weekend, to cheer himself up, Jeb went to a local singles bar. He wasn't cheered, however. The sight of all those strangers trying to make a good impression on each other just depressed him more. It also seemed as though everyone was going outside to smoke. I feel rotten, he thought. A cigarette would sure cheer me up right now. When a casual friend said, "Want to go outside and have a smoke?" Jeb accepted. A few minutes later, he went to the corner store and bought a pack of his favorite brand. He ordered another drink, felt his spirits lift, and lit up. The next day, Jeb woke up, poured his coffee, and had a cigarette. A year later, he is still smoking. I was never sure that I would quit anyway. When I went back that night, it just proved it. I'm addicted, and I can't quit. So Jeb's story contains several elements that may help you prevent a relapse. Whether your problem is overeating, smoking, drinking, abusive substances, depression, or any other kind of situation in which relapse is a possibility. Okay, however, it's important that we take an opportunity or take this opportunity now to make a clear delineation between what lapse and relapse is. So we've all heard the word relapse, but maybe we haven't become familiar yet with the term lapse. And lapse is just a single slip or a mistake. A relapse is going back to your full-blown pattern of unwanted behavior. So you should expect that you will have lapses. What we don't want to happen is we don't want them to turn into full-on relapses like Jeb did. He could have just, had that bad night, had a couple cigarettes while drinking at the bar, and then viewed that as a lapse and kind of kept going with his project, rather than going, well, I already smoked, throwing his hands up in the air, and then just smoking for the next year, right? So just because you have a lapse doesn't mean you have to then give yourself permission to spin entirely out of control. People often think that the main reason of relapse for unwanted addictive behaviors is because of cravings, but that's actually not true. The four main high-risk situations for doing your bad behavior are being emotionally upset, being in dangerous social settings, drinking alcohol, and unexpected encounters with temptation. So let's talk about these a little bit further. Being emotionally upset, we use smoking, overeating, watching TV as ways to control our emotions, lighten our spirit, feel better. So when we are emotionally upset, we tend to turn to these comforting behaviors that for many of us are the behavior we're trying to stop doing for this project. We also want to avoid dangerous social settings, and these are settings where others are engaging in the behavior that you want to stop or are encouraging you to join in with them doing these behaviors that you're trying to stop. So what you want to do is you want to avoid these settings and or these type of people. And then the third high-risk situation is drinking alcohol, and like we talked about before, alcohol makes you less self-aware. It affects judgment because it impedes the frontal lobe. And ultimately, it makes you not care about paying attention to what's good for you. And then the fourth high-risk situation is unexpected encounters with temptation. These can catch you off guard and you may not have a plan for them. So what you want to do is observe and record high-risk situations so you can better predict them. You also want to recognize how you feel if you are receiving social pressure and you want to relax. And finally, you want to develop a plan for when temptation occurs unexpectedly. You want to kind of know exactly what you're going to do if temptation comes out of nowhere to avoid having a lapse. So, just as you have a plan for how you're going to deal with temptation, you can also have a plan for coping with lapses before they turn into relapse, and kind of a plan for preventing lapses from turning into relapses. And so, what you can do if you notice that you had a lapse or two, so that it doesn't turn into a relapse, is you can keep keeping records. So, keep observing yourself. Don't stop doing that. In fact, it might be a good idea to even increase a record keeping. So, increase your self observations. And if you haven't been record keeping or doing your self observations, then you certainly would need to start ASAP. You could also make a full-scale self-change project for if you lapse. So you could look at what caused the lapse and identify antecedents, and then do the techniques we learned about narrowing antecedents and modifying antecedents and rearranging antecedents. You could include reinforcers for if you are tempted to have another lapse and don't do that. You could use other techniques that we talked about, like shaping, imaginary rehearsal, relaxation, self-contract. You could also make a reminder card and keep it on you, and this is just something that would tell you a reminder of why you're doing this project. And then another thing that you could do to help you kind of prevent a lapse from turning into a relapse is blame the situation, not your personality. So don't take the lapse super personally, because if you do, you're likely to get discouraged, and that just leads to more lapses. So another thing is that sometimes you might consent to your unwanted habit. So have a lapse, in other words, and just know that people often lapse and then go crazy, relapsing and engaging in the behavior more than ever before. And so the reason why is actually what we call acquiescence, which is a fancy word for boredom. So the short-term rewards feel good. People are not focusing on long-term consequences when they have a full-on relapse. Their behavior is in a long, complicated chain, and once you start doing that unwanted behavior again, the idea of breaking that long, complicated chain can feel very overwhelming. So, for these reasons, people become kind of sucked back into their bad behavior, so to speak. But kind of, if you don't want to do any of these things that we've talked about here to prevent a lapse from turning into a relapse, the one thing that you should do, if only you do one thing, is to keep making records, because it keeps your attention focused on your wanted behaviors. It keeps your eye on the prize, so to speak. Okay, so for lecture activity 5, we're going to make a plan for coping with lapses before they turn into relapses. So what I'd like you to do is just think of a kind of hiccup you've had in your progress, so a lapse that maybe you've had, or if everything's been going perfectly smoothly and you haven't had any mistakes or given in to temptation at all or done even a small portion of your bad behavior, then think about what could potentially be so tempting that you have a lapse. And I want you to tell me what you could do to avoid that lapse from turning into a relapse. So, whether you've had a lapse or not had a lapse, talk about how you could prevent a lapse that you've had before, or a potential lapse, from turning into a full-on relapse. And so in chapter 10, we're going to talk about staying in control and the idea that it is easy for our bad behavior to come rushing back. So we need to make sure that we do two things. We want to make sure that we maintain our gains. So the progress that we've made, we want to try to not, have any setbacks and kind of keep that momentum going. And we want to make sure that our newly learned behaviors will transfer to new situations. So we're able to, let's say, avoid drinking alcohol when we're just sitting at home, or if we have a friend over. But we want to make sure that we're able to continue to avoid alcohol even when we are at a club or at a bar. So we want to make sure that our good behavior is going to stay our good behavior and the behavior that we choose to do in a variety of different situations. So I'm not going to lecture on the whole chapter 10 here. You can read over the chapter yourself. It's fairly short and pretty straightforward. But some of the things I just want to highlight are that we want to try to maintain our happiness. The happier that we are, the more likely we are to have continued success in doing our good behavior. So real quick, some ways to increase happiness are to try to reduce any negative emotions. just remember that you are in control of your emotions. Your self-talk is very powerful. So you want to pay attention to and manage what you're saying to yourself and make sure that it's loving and supportive, and that will help to reduce some of those negative emotions. Another thing that you can do is focus on gratitude. So having an attitude of gratitude is all about counting your blessings and paying attention to the little things that make your life more convenient or easier, or the people that you have around you. And if you focus on what's right instead of what's wrong, obviously you're going to feel happier. Another thing you can do is improve your lifestyle. So make your body feel good, right? So eat healthy, exercise, go to bed at a reasonable time, get a good night's sleep. So do what you need to do to keep kind of your body functioning in a really healthy way, and that will decrease the likelihood of you feeling irritable or frustrated. You also want to increase the amount of social activity you have, even if you're an introvert and you really prefer to just be by yourself. Being around other people does help us to feel happier. We are wired to be social creatures, and so when we are around other people, our brain rewards us with little bursts of dopamine, which are brain chemicals that make us feel happy. So that's kind of a good hack to increase happiness, is just to spend time with other people, even if initially you don't want to do it. Generally, after you're at the party for 30 minutes or so, you kind of settle in and then you start having a good time. And then another thing you can do to increase happiness are pro-social behaviors, which is helping behavior. So if you can get involved in volunteering, charity, just holding the door for people, doing nice things to kind of help other people get through their day easier, actually has the effect of making you, the giver of your time or space or whatever it is that you're giving, a little bit happier. So try those techniques to increase happiness. For lecture activity 6, I'd like you to actually tell me which one of those techniques you think you'd be most likely to do, and then specifically what would you do within that technique. So for example, if you tell me you're going to do a pro-social behavior, exactly what would that pro-social behavior be? Okay, so one of the things that we can do to kind of make ourselves happier, have a higher level of self-esteem, self-efficacy, which are really good things for our success in this project. So one of the things that we can do to increase the likelihood of success is to make sure that there is meaning in our lives. So humans need purpose, they need meaning, they need to feel valuable, they need to feel like their work is something that is improving the space in which they live, or for the people around them, or the world, or whatever it may be. So there's 4 categories of behavior that produce meaning in life. So there's your life work dimension. Do you feel like you are valued and important in your work? And if you don't, what things could you do at your job that would give you a sense of purpose? Or is there a different job that you could have that would help you to feel like you have meaning at work? Another way to make meaning in your life is to examine the spiritual dimension. So, what is your belief system? Whether you are atheist, agnostic, Christian, Buddhist, whatever it is, what is your relationship with some of the big questions? With questions like, why are we here? What is the meaning of life? What happens after this? And kind of grapple with some of those ideas, because when we look at our lives from a spiritual perspective, sometimes that does kind of change our perspective in a way that can cause us to zoom out and consider things from a broader point of view, and maybe see that our little problems are not that big of a deal on kind of a broader scale. Another dimension is the relationship dimension. And so we want to make sure that in this dimension we have intimacy with other people, and that we're vulnerable and open and honest with them. And from relationships where we're authentic with our the people in the relationship with us, we tend to get more out of those relationships. We tend to get more fulfillment. And so those relationships in and of themselves can provide us meaning in life. And then finally, a social dimension is the dimension in which we try to leave something behind, have an impact on society. leave our footprint in the sand, so to speak. So what are you doing to give to other people? If you can kind of look at that and see if there's more you could do, then this might give you an opportunity to find more purpose and meaning in your life. Okay, so of those 4 categories of behaviors, what dimension do you think that you could improve upon in your life to create more meaning? So, do you think that you could maybe give more, be more pro social, be more helpful in society or in your family? Um, and if you do, then tell me what you could do to kind of increase the meaning in that dimension in your life. So, how could you give? How could you do more helping behaviors, or whatever category you choose? How can you do those behaviors to increase the meaning in your life? For lecture activity 7, I believe. All right, so that is it for chapter 9 and 10. Actually, that's it for the whole book of the self-directed behavior book. So don't forget to do the assignments for this module and submit the lecture activities, and we will see you next time. Have a great day.